I've got to talk to you about these new injections people are getting to lose weight.
Yeah.
And the role that they must be playing in our hormone balances. What are those bloody things called? The
GLP-1s?
GLP-1s. There's another name for it, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, there's the drug name, which is OZEMPIC is the American name. And these are all in a class called GLP-1s. And essentially, again, very interesting because they essentially really reduce the appetite, which goes to show you that, and people lose weight, like a lot of weight, and they keep it off. So
I know very
17%.
smart people that are using them. A billionaire friend of mine that's very big in a certain industry uses Ozempic. I know Elon Musk came out and said
he used it. Yeah, that's
Ozempic
right.
as well.
I don't have any problem with the Ozempic because, again, if you think about it, what it's telling you, the lesson it's teaching you about weight loss is that it's not about controlling the calories, because the Ozempic doesn't burn any calories. It's about controlling your hunger. It's about that one level deeper. Why are you taking so many calories? So if you simply reduce the hunger, you're going to naturally eat fewer calories, which is going to cause weight loss. And that's what this Ozempic does. It really reduces your appetite to very low levels.
How?
It's this hormone called GLP-1, which is a natural sort of hormone. It's released mostly in the intestines, in the distal intestine and the small intestine. And in response to certain foods, it goes up, right? So when you eat, the body has a homeostatic mechanism. So again, remember, people think that we're just eating machines. We eat until, we explode sort of thing. But that's not true. When you eat, you actually activate the GLP-1 along with other hormones. There's multiple hormonal systems. The GLP-1 is the one we're interested in. You activate GLP-1, which then sets into motion the instructions for you to stop eating, right? So the act of eating sort of sets in motion that whole feedback loop to stop, right? So this is homeostasis, which is trying to keep things at a proper level.
Does that mean if you eat slower, you'll eat less?
There's probably
it'll
not
give it more time to come out.
Yeah, probably it's true. Although it's probably mostly true that if you eat really, really fast, that you don't have enough time for this sort of homeostatic mechanisms to kick in. So you don't have enough time to stop eating. But the GLP-1s then go to the brain. So they do certain things. They help with digestion. So they increase insulin response. And then they go to the brain. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. So the GLP-1s gets released by the act of eating, goes into the brain, crosses and is active in the sort of midbrain area that tells your body to stop eating. What these GLP-1s do, of course, is that it gives you the hormone that tells you to stop eating, even though you haven't eaten. It's sort of, that's the way the drug works. So then what people tell you is that, they're just not hungry. And if they're not hungry, then they don't eat. And when they don't eat, of course, insulin falls and you start to burn calories and lose weight. But it wasn't about controlling the calories. It was about controlling the hunger. That was the important part of it. It's the hormones, right? Every successful drug to gain or lose weight, right, is a hormone. It's a hormone base because that's instructions to the body. Food is energy and food is instructions. You change the instructions and you change the hormone.
We'll look at this through an evolutionary lens and say, we just didn't have this much food. So it's the abundance and ease of access to food. It's the fridges that we now have. It's the, we never had fridges in our home. So people point at it and go, well, that's why people are gaining weight. And, we're suffering with obesity at epidemic levels. It's just because there's more supply. And the brain is taking advantage of it because once upon a time, if we didn't eat that jam and toast, then we would have, maybe not have been able to find food for another 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, I don't think that's the whole story because if you think about it, and people, again, make that assumption that we don't have any control over our body fatness, right? So they say, well, it's available, so you're going to take it, right? In fact, that's not true because we actually have a number of different hormones that tell us to stop eating. Okay, so if you eat, you cannot simply keep eating and eating and eating, right? If you go to an all-you-can-eat buffet, at some point, you have to stop because you're full. right? So there are systems, very powerful systems within our body that tell us to stop eating. So you eat food. There are stomach stretch receptors, for example. So as your stomach stretches out, it sends a signal to your brain and says, stop eating. If you eat a lot of protein, it activates a hormone called peptide YY, which tells you to stop eating. If you eat a lot of dietary fat, you activate a hormone called cholecystokinin, which again tells you to stop eating. And these are very powerful. If you look in the wild, there are no obese antelope. There are no obese lions. Why? Because how much body fat you carry is actually very important. If you are obese as an antelope, you're going to get eaten. If you're an obese lion, you're not going to catch any food. So therefore, it's going to correct itself.
So if I overeat now, my body will basically overcompensate by burning off the extra calories.
Absolutely. So if you eat a huge meal, right? You go to a big wedding or something like that, you eat a huge meal. The next day, you're probably not that hungry. If you eat a giant steak, so you're activating all these satiety hormones, peptide YY, cholecystokinin, you're eating all this food. Well, you may not be hungry for the next day.
So that means that my body has some kind of baseline weight.
Yeah, it will know whether you should eat more or less. So there's this concept called the sort of body set weight, which is a sort of thermometer. That is, your body sets a weight that you should be at. And if you go above that weight, or if you eat too much, it will activate hormonal systems to bring it back down. If you don't eat enough, it will also activate hormonal systems to bring it up. So it's like a thermostat that you have in your room. For example, you set the room temperature. If it's too hot, the room activates the air conditioning. If it's too cold, it activates the heat. Your body actually acts the same way. If you gain too much body fat, your fat cells, for example, will produce leptin, which is another hormone. The leptin tells your body to stop eating.
That's really interesting. So in the case of obese people, their set point must just be really high.
Yes. And that's the crux of the matter. Why is that set point being overridden? Just like if you have a room that's too hot and you look and you say, the thermometer is set for room temperature. Why is it so hot in here? Then you can say, okay, well, what's the problem? And the problem is not, heat in versus heat out, right? That's a very simplistic way. Same thing. If your body has too much body fat, you got to then think about, why are you overcoming the normal compensatory mechanisms that are happening, that are stopping you from eating? A lot of it relates to processing of foods, of course. So if you take out, so remember I talked about stretch receptors in the stomach, right? So you eat natural foods, there's a natural break. It stretches the stomach, you stop eating. Well, what's one way? Pull out all the fiber, process the foods, turn it into, say, a very fine dust. That means it's absorbed extremely quickly into the bloodstream. So that means that you've got pure carbohydrate, basically mainlining it into your IV, like an IV. Your glucose spikes way up, your insulin spikes way up. Completely unnatural, right? If you eat pure carbohydrate instead of eating it with, proteins and fats, it's going to shoot way high. That's unnatural. And that's going to overcome the natural tendencies for you to stop eating. So, you've basically overcome that protective mechanism because you've ultra processed the carbohydrates. If you don't eat any protein, if you don't eat any fat, you're not activating peptide YY, which is the satiety hormone. You're not activating cholecystokinin. All of a sudden, you're eating, 500 calories of white bread, but you have zero satiety. Or if you drink a Coca-Cola or a soda, for example, I've always, thought about this. It's like, how can you take 1,000 calories, for example, in one of those giant sodas you get at the ball game or something, and don't feel full at all? Whereas if you took a steak that's 1,000 calories, you'd be like, I'm pretty full. I don't really feel like eating. You drink the soda, you're like, I really feel like eating some chips or popcorn or something. Why? Because it has zero satiety. Right?
Interesting. So if I've got a baseball stadium, what I want to do is I want to make sure people get a soda, because then they'll also buy the chips. But if they just eat the chips, maybe they won't buy anything else. But the soda is going to increase my revenue because it'll basically just pass right through them.
It'll pass right through them. They're going to store all that energy as calories, but they're going to want more because you haven't made them full, right? So the whole point is that you have to think more than about the calories. There's more there than just the calorie story. There's this whole hormonal balance.
You're saying that overeating isn't just a choice, it's a hormone-driven behavior.
It's a hormone-driven behavior. I mean, the whole thing about obesity is quite interesting to me because if you think about obesity, if you think about in the United States, which is where I get a lot of my data from, you have maybe 70% of people overweight or obese, and it's going up every year. It's been going up every year since 1977. And if you think about that, it tells you that the problem is not willpower. The problem is not the people. The problem is the environment that they find themselves in, the food environment that they find themselves in. Because you can take an analogy. Say you have 100 children. One of them fails. Well, that might be the child. They didn't study. What if 70 of them fail? Would you say it's each and every one of them's fault? Or would you say it's more likely that it's the teacher's fault? I think it's more likely that it's the teacher's fault. So if we have 100 Americans and 70 of them are obese, the problem is likely not an individual willpower problem. The problem is likely that there's something wrong with the message we're giving people, the information we're giving people, and the food environment that we're finding ourselves in, which is dominated by this sort of calories in, calories out thinking. And what's really unfair, of course, is that we put the blame on the obesity or overweight on the individual. And we say, well, they let themselves go and they didn't watch themselves. They weren't careful. It's their fault. And that's the stigma that comes with this whole calories in, calories out thinking, because we say it's their fault because they could choose what they eat. It's like, yes, they could choose what they eat, but they didn't choose the food environment that is telling them to eat all this ultra-processed food, that is making all this ultra-processed food available to them, that is telling them that all this ultra-processed food is good for you.